I think everybody's getting the same feeling that something just feels off with some of our top quarterbacks and tight ends. And so that makes us feel really uneasy heading into the fantasy playoffs. But that's what we're going to sort through today. The top quarterbacks, the top tight ends for the fantasy playoffs. And I'm doing everything I can to bring us home all chips this year. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now I want to start with the tight ends here first. We'll get Trey McBride out of the way. I think when we line him up with other guys like George Kittle and Brock Bowers and even Travis Kelce, you'll understand where I'm coming from when I say Trey McBride, I don't care what schedule is. Because when you look at Trey McBride, the guy has been so bulletproof and matchup proof that matchups don't really matter. So yes, you can look at the matchups and say, well, that Houston one, that's a tough one. I understand that week 15, maybe you don't want to play him, but I can't imagine anyone sitting Trey McBride that week, because then the following 2 weeks you get Atlanta and then Cincinnati. Trey McBride has been so good and so consistent at hitting a 20-point ceiling with Jacoby Brissett. And that's not going to change heading into the fantasy playoffs. Dropping down to our next tier, we've got George Kittle at 2 and Brock Bowers at 3. So with George Kittle, what it comes down to for me is I would rather play with him than I would with Brock Bowers at this point for one simple reason. I can rely on Kittle's quarterback so much more than I can rely on Bowers' quarterback. And I see more holes with the Bowers matchups than I do with Kittle's. With Kittle, you get Tennessee in the first week of the playoffs, then you get Indy, and then you get Chicago. There's not really a super tough one in there, aside from Indy, who has been tough on the year, but is actually just getting worse because they've been injured more and more over the weeks. So with Kittle, I have a lot more confidence in him hitting 20-point ceilings than I do with Bowers. While also acknowledging any week, any given week, Bowers can give you 20 plus, in the 30s probably. Bowers can do that. But I don't like his quarterback situation, and that's not a foreign concept to anybody because everybody understands how bad Geno has been this year. And then you factor in some of these matchups at Philly, at Houston versus the Giants. The only thing that could really make the Philly matchup beatable is if Jalen Carter misses that game too. And by the way, Jalen Carter, surgeries on both shoulders just this past Monday. So this is a guy that maybe missed some time and opens up a matchup here for Brock Bowers, but I ultimately just worry about his schedule and his quarterback situation more than I worry about the other two top guys. Travis Kelce's at 4 and Tyler Warren's at 5 to round out the tier. Travis Kelce has just been awesome. Like, I have been wrong every step of the way with Travis Kelce this year. He's having a great send-off if this is it for him. This guy is consistently hitting 15 points, 10 points at the minimum, and with a ceiling of 20 to 25. Like, this is kind of a less than vintage Travis Kelce year, but it is a very good swan song if it is his last one. Then you give him matchups like the Chargers at Tennessee and then versus Denver. The only one you could pick on is that Denver matchup. But either way, those first two, those are matchups he could easily take advantage of. And just based on the way he's playing this year, I would choose him over Tyler Warren because I like Tyler Warren. And people who come to my rankings weekly, you understand Tyler Warren's usually in the top 3 for me. The thing with Tyler Warren, though, is when you actually look at his game log, nothing really stands out because he's not getting like 20-point games. What stands out to me more than anything is how consistent he's been getting double-digit points. So this one, from a consistency standpoint, I think is a top 5 play in the playoffs. But I will say this, the matchup against Seattle, I don't trust that one. Versus San Fran, that's a better one. And then versus Jacksonville, that's going to be hit or miss depending on what we see from that matchup this weekend. So I don't think Tyler Warren has the ceiling of a Bowers, of a Kittle, but I do think he belongs in this tier simply because of consistency. Dropping down to our next tier, we've got Jake Ferguson at 6 and Juwan Johnson at 7. So when it comes to Jake Ferguson, I think one thing has become clear. With CD back and with George Pickens in the lineup, Jake Ferguson has been pretty steadily involved to the tune of like 5 to 8 targets per game, which is really solid. That's like kind of what you need from a tight end position. So I do think from that perspective and from the offense's perspective of throwing the ball more, you have to keep Jake Ferguson somewhere around this range. And I will say this as well. I don't think he has the ceiling games that he had earlier in the year without CeeDee Lamb. The 20-plus point games, I don't think those are happening. I think on the high end, he can give you 17 to maybe 20 points, but I don't think he's going to give you 20-plus. I do think that Jake Ferguson is stabilized to a point you can trust. So these matchups, Minnesota, Los Angeles Chargers at Washington, those are all, in theory, beatable matchups moving forward for Ferguson. But again, you just kind of have to limit the upside because he himself just hasn't hit the upside since CD has been back. Juwan Johnson at 7. I think Juwan Johnson's really solid. Like, I really, really do. There's a couple things working in his favor. Number one is that they're so weapon deprived that he has become a massive target in this offense on a weekly basis. Number two, he's actually been pretty good this year on his targets as well. Like he can give you about 20 points on any given week. And the matchups here, they're really good. Versus Carolina, versus the Jets, at Tennessee. Yes, you may see some of those matchups in the red when you look at Juwan Johnson on Sleeper or on ESPN, but that's just because a lot of those defenses can be ran on. I do think that Juwan Johnson, and you factor in the Saints running game, they're going to continue to throw the ball because that's their most effective route to victory. So I do think Juwan Johnson, from the involvement standpoint and from the offensive efficiency standpoint, has got to be in the top 10 somewhere. Zach Ertz at number 8 and Dalton Kincaid at number 9. I will tell you this. I am just filming right as we got the news that Jaden Daniels is coming back in week 14. This may be an underranking right here. This is something I picked on Ertz for a while, and actually I've been wrong. Because Ertz, my thing has always been, I think if Jaden Daniels is out there, I want Zach Ertz. If he's not out there, I'll take somebody else because I think Ertz is a guy that is very quarterback dependent, and it has been historically, over the last year, not historically, but with Jaden Daniels, he's been really good. And so he came out, proved me wrong against Marcus Mariota, not once, but twice. So now that Jaden's back, I kind of am wondering if this is too low of a ranking. He's got 3 divisional matchups in the playoffs. At the Giants, versus Philly, and then versus Dallas. I do think every single one of those is pretty beatable. So I will say this is a very solid play for the entirety of the playoffs. Dalton Kincaid at number 9. He is a guy that is completely dependent on whether he returns from injury or not. Because I will say this, one thing that's going to be interesting to watch is the practice report heading into week 14, because this is a guy who has been out for 3 weeks. So if he misses this one, it'll be 4, basically meaning they should have put him on the IR. And so I don't know what his story is. I know he's gone through a lot of limited practices heading into week 14. Obviously, if he plays, I consider him a very consistent target because Buffalo has nothing else. They've got nothing else to work with. So you look at these matchups, there's a couple tough ones on here potentially. At New England, at Cleveland versus Philly. Those are all toss-up matchups. I would say Cleveland is probably the toughest one. But I do think at this point, you factor in Josh Allen, you factor in the fact that they're trying to fight for the playoffs right now, they're going to continue to feed their most trusted option, which in my opinion is clearly Dalton Kincaid. Darren Waller at number 10 and Hunter Henry at number 11 to round out the tier. Darren Waller, I think, is just, it's maybe considered unfair to certain people that he was able to claim a spot in these rankings, but I do think of him as just a superior option because when you think about all the targets that he's gotten this year, which has been very minimal, by the way, but you think of all the downfield work he's gotten and the end zone work he's gotten, that's not going away. And truth be told, we don't even need Waller to get 7 or 8 targets. Like most tight ends need to be a good fantasy play. He can get 4 targets and he can get in the end zone once or twice. That's the thing with Waller. So when you look at the matchups too, you've got to factor those in. At Pittsburgh versus Cincy versus Tampa, those are all matchups that can easily be taken advantage of. And so for those reasons, while it may be unfair, I'm pushing a lot of other guys down because I'd rather have Waller and the upside of that play. Hunter Henry at 11. I think of him as also a very high upside play. The way May is playing right now like an MVP, the pass catching options in New England being kind of inconsistent, and just the fact that Hunter Henry can hit ceiling games still, to me, he's still in this tier. And then you look at the matchups versus Buffalo, at Baltimore, at the Jets. Those are all good matchups that I would like to take advantage of. The problem with Henry is that he can destroy your week, and that's why he's factored in to this low of a ranking, because it's not lost on me that he could absolutely tank you if you are not in good position already. So you do have to consider a couple things here with Henry. He can give you 1 point, he can give you 2 points depending on your format, which will tank you. and you have to be prepared for that, but I do think the upside is somewhere north of 20 points still. But I do want to make sure everybody understands this. I am still doing team breakdowns for those in need heading into the fantasy playoffs because it has never been a better time to make sure your team is completely ready to go and geared up for a playoff run. We'll do a live stream and live team breakdowns with live back and forth dialogue between you and me on what moves you need to make to enhance your team and your chances of winning this year in fantasy football. And if you want to get access to the automatic waiver tool, the comparison feature, the league sync up feature, and my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis, you can also get the premium subscription at fsroundup.com. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Dalton Schultz is at 12 and Brenton Strange is at 13. Schultz has become a very consistent target in Houston's offense. And we all know their running game has really struggled this year. And I don't think it's going to find a balanced point because I don't think Woody Marks gives them what they want. But Nick Chubb is obviously just not good enough, and their offensive line isn't good enough either. So from a running game perspective, they're going to continue to be hit or miss, which means that they're going to throw the ball a lot of times in a lot of games, over 30 times a game. Meaning that he is really ironed out to be the number 2 target in most cases over someone like Jaden Higgins, who I actually do consider a solid play for the playoffs. But I do think of Dalton Schultz as a really stable guy, just not one that's going to give you a 20-point ceiling. At his best, he'll give you 17 or 18, but those are kind of few and far between. So with Schultz, I think he'll give you a stable 8 to 12 points on a weekly basis, but getting 14, 15 points out of him, that's a little bit of a stretch. You consider his matchups, Arizona, Las Vegas Raiders, and the Chargers. They're all good. I just don't think he has the upside because he's not much of an after-the-catch type of guy. Brenton Strange, though, this guy is a legitimate... I like him a lot. I think he's a legitimate league-winning type of tight end at this late in the season. Think about it like this. He missed basically 2 months of the season in the middle of the season. So then he comes back and he's immediately relevant on few targets, by the way. His target share is not even through the roof right now because of Brian Thomas Jr. being there, Jacoby Myers being there. Brenton Strange has kind of been all over the map from a target perspective, and it hasn't been that many targets on a per game basis yet. But I do think that he's on an offense that's hitting its stride kind of at the perfect time, and he has been good down the field for them and after the catch. That's why I do think that he's got to be a spot lower than Schultz, because while I see the bigger play upside with Strange, I don't see the target share. But I do think the matchups are, in theory, some of them pretty good. Versus the Jets, at Denver is not good, and then at Indy could or could not be good. We'll have to see how things go this week. But I just think Brenton Strange should be in these rankings somewhere. Oronde Gadsden is at 14, and Mark Andrews is at 15 to round out this tier. My thing with Oronde Gadsden is that he peaked at probably the worst time, and I don't think it's getting much better because it's already going in the wrong direction, right? He has had 3 straight bad games ever since that Pittsburgh Steelers game on Sunday night where he was dropping a lot of passes. He has not recovered since then, and his target share has gone down. Now, here's what I said when he initially broke out with Quentin Johnston. I said, don't cut Johnston because he will be back. I still believe the same about Gadsden, which is why he's still on this list, because I do think the upside is still there. But I will say this, you add on that injury to Justin Herbert, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. It definitely is creating problems for the future of Oronde Gadsden, so I've got to mitigate risk by putting him down here at 14. Mark Andrews at 15, though. We know that this guy is touchdown or bust, essentially. That's basically been Mark Andrews for the last 2 years in fantasy. And the good thing is, with Lamar, you can count on a touchdown kind of every other game. Now, I do think his schedule is pretty favorable. Goes to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. I think that they won't beat them twice as bad in the second time. Versus New England, that's a solid matchup you could take advantage of, possibly. And then at Green Bay is obviously the tough one. But Andrews, to me, is a guy that's still going to be consistently involved enough to where the touchdown kind of matters. Kind of a Darren Waller light type of situation, because with Lamar, you can always count on him getting targeted at least 4 to 5 times a game, and the potential of a red zone touchdown is always there. Dropping down to our last tier with our last guy in it, Harold Fannin Jr. is here at 16. He is going to Chicago, playing Buffalo, and playing Pittsburgh at home. I think it has become clear to me that he has been the number one with Shedeur Sanders. And if we are assuming Shedeur Sanders is the starter in Cleveland, maybe Deshaun Watson comes in there, probably not. But I do think that Harold Fannin has become the preferred tight end option for Shedeur Sanders. Whether it's Njoku, who's dealing with injury, or whether it's because Shedeur Sanders just prefers, Harold Fannin, whatever the case is, the facts are the facts. And Fannin has been more involved with 2 weeks of Shedeur. So I do think at this point, his floor is stabilized to a really solid place. And I don't think that he has massive upside games. But I will say this, I think he's going to give you a consistent 10 points throughout that playoff record. Now let's go to the quarterbacks here. I feel pretty comfortable having Josh Allen in this spot alone by himself in his own tier. And it's different than Trey McBride. The thing with Trey McBride is that he's been so consistent at hitting 20 points that nobody else has done that. The thing with Allen is that he's not consistent. You could definitely lose a matchup with Allen in there if he only gives you 16 points because you're kind of predicated on massive weeks with Josh Allen. But that's the reason he's here, because Josh Allen can give you 30 to 40 unlike any other quarterback can this year. That's why he's got to be here. It's very simple. You go to New England, you go to the Browns, and you take on Philly. I wouldn't say any of those matchups are ideal necessarily, but I just trust the guy to give you 40 points, unlike I trust any other one of these quarterbacks. In tier 2, dropping down to that tier, Patrick Mahomes at 2, Dak Prescott at 3. Listen, my thing with Mahomes is that he's also been a little inconsistent as well, but I would say more consistent than Allen. But the difference is he doesn't have the ceiling that Allen does. His ceiling is probably around 30, which is good. But I don't think that he has that weak winning ceiling like Allen does. So then you factor in the matchups versus the Chargers at Tennessee versus Denver. There's one tough one in there, obviously, and that's Denver, because the first time he played them wasn't that good. In fact, I'd actually go as far as to say you might want to plan on benching him in that matchup if you've got somebody else like a Drake May, like someone like Stafford. I do think that those guys could go in that matchup instead of Mahomes. But I'll also add this. Mahomes is still a great play for the fantasy playoffs because of those first two matchups and the potential that he has against those two defenses, particularly without a run game that's consistent. Dak Prescott at number 3, I do think is in good position moving forward. I did try to tell people I didn't love Dak against Detroit. Turns out he did okay. Like, he's going to be fine. It's not going to kill you what he gave you. But I do think he has better weeks moving forward. I think this Minnesota matchup is awesome. The Los Angeles Chargers matchup is awesome. And the Washington matchup is awesome. I do think Dak has a really good, future moving forward in the playoffs. My only thing with Dak is I wonder if the team maybe stops trying as hard, because I wouldn't accuse anybody specifically of doing that outside of Pickens, because we all saw some of the effort that Pickens put in on there. And that's kind of one of the things the Steelers wanted to move off of with Pickens. Nevertheless, Pickens is a great talent. CeeDee, when healthy, is a great talent. And Dak has done so well this year. He belongs in the top 3. But I'm just telling you, the reason he's below Mahomes is because I kind of trust Dak's team to try as hard as Mahomes' team throughout the fantasy playoffs. Drake May at number 4 and Joe Burrow at number 5 to round out the tier. Drake May has been mostly good. There's been a couple of games where nobody gets killed by playing Drake May on a weekly basis, but there's been games where he's been in a good matchup in theory, and then he doesn't do very much. So you kind of are left scratching your head just thinking, what did I just watch? This guy should have done 30 points on a team like the Jets. And you just haven't really gotten that from Drake May quite yet. So Drake May, I just think that his ceiling is a little capped and his floor is a little destabilized compared to those other guys right there. Versus Buffalo, at Baltimore, at the Jets. In theory, again, they all should be good matchups, but I just trust them a little less than I trust Dak and Mahomes. And with Burrow here, it's again a trust thing. Burrow, if I had full trust, he'd actually be at number 2. Because these matchups are juicy. Versus Baltimore again, at Miami, and then versus the Cardinals. Not a bad matchup in there. My only problem, and if I did these rankings after this week, and let's say Burrow puts up 30 points on the Buffalo Bills, I would have Burrow ranked higher. But since we sit here today before the Buffalo game, his second game back, I've got to mitigate it a little bit by putting him at 5. But having him at 5, I think is actually a little bit of a statement ranking in itself to say to you guys, I think Burrow is primed for a big playoff run. Dropping down to our next tier, Matt Stafford at 6, and Jalen Hurts lands at 7. So Matt Stafford also playing at an MVP level this year, and he's been mostly good as well. In fact, I could probably point out games where I've been more unhappy with May more often than I can with Stafford. Stafford's had a couple stinkers, and May hasn't really had those, but May's just had several mid-weeks. Stafford either is going to give you 25 plus, or he's either going to just give you 7, give you 8 points, which will crush you. And that's why he's got to be a tier lower than a guy like May. Versus Detroit, at Seattle, at Atlanta. The only tough one in there is Seattle, obviously. But I do think Stafford has done well enough to earn himself a spot in the top 6. Jalen Hurts at number 7. The problem with Hurts, we all know, is that he's not running as much as he used to. You only get the rushing upside when they do a tush push at the goal line. And that's a problem because with Hurts, a lot of his rushing upside in the past was the reason why he was being a fantasy quarterback that you could count on being a top 3 to 5 guy. You can't count on that this year with Hurts because he's not a great thrower. At best, he'll give you 300 every month, once a month, something like that. So I just don't trust Hurts as much as I trust a lot of these other pocket passers that I would rather have above him. But I will say this, he's got some favorable matchups. The Raiders are a good one, Washington's a good one, and Buffalo is a good one as well. So there is matchups he can take advantage of. I just don't have as much trust with him, and their team as a whole right now is falling apart. Jackson Dart, he belongs here, guys. Don't kid yourself. And Jaden Daniels also belongs here as well. Jackson Dart versus Washington versus Minnesota at the Raiders. Name me a tough matchup in there. And also, here's the other thing with this one. Jackson Dart, my only concern with him is the team's effort moving forward because they're done. They've been finished for a long time. Dart himself has played really well outside of 1 week, and he's still a high-effort guy. If you saw Jackson Dart and looked at his game log, by far his worst game this year was the Monday night game against New England. Guess what? They were on two polar opposite ends of the spectrum. One's a winning team that could be the number 1 seed, and one's basically jockeying for the number 1 pick. So Jackson Dart, to me, when you hear the comments about him saying, we're not playing soccer, we're playing football, basically saying, double middle fingers, I'm going to keep running the ball. That just tells me that this guy is still hungry to play some good football here. And I believe absolutely 100% he's a top 10 quarterback for the playoffs. Jaden Daniels at 9. The one thing that's different between him and Lamar is that they both missed time this year, obviously. But Jaden Daniels, if you look at him from a fantasy points per game perspective, I would say that he's a safer play. And I don't think that he has the same level of upside he had last year, or even at the beginning of this year, for example. But I do think of Jaden Daniels as someone who's got some good matchups too. Once again, they play the whole division in 3 weeks. At New York Giants versus Philly and then versus Dallas. There's a couple good matchups in there and possibly 3. So I do think he could take advantage of at least 2 of them for 20-plus point games. But I don't think his ceiling is what it was last year, giving you 30-plus points. Dropping down to that next tier, Lamar Jackson is at 10 and Brock Purdy is at 11. So a lot of people are definitely going to be wondering, what's the deal with Lamar, right? And we talked about it a little bit yesterday and several times throughout the earlier part of the week. Lamar, you just can't trust right now. And I feel confident ranking him down here this low because I'm guaranteeing you he's not the same player that he was even in week 2 or week 3. He is not healthy. And if you take away the rushing upside from Lamar, not only do you lose points from that perspective, you're also going to lose points from the passing perspective. Because I've got a secret for you. Lamar has never been a top tier pocket passer guy. I'm not saying he's bad. He's gotten much better, and I think he's a great player. But what I'm trying to tell you is that every defense has to remain honest, and they can't favor the run or the pass when Lamar is fully healthy because they know if they favor the run too much, he can dart out and just burn you deep for like 50-yard run. He can't do that right now, so it's limiting his upside. So even against Cincinnati once again, even against the New England Patriots. And then against the Packers, there's matchups here I don't particularly love, and I just know at this point, we're not getting vintage Lamar Jackson anymore this year. You kind of have to hang that dream up right now. Brock Purdy at 11. I will say that Brock Purdy is in good position because of a matchup perspective. I do worry about him and the turnovers, particularly at this time of the year, and especially if you get him in inclement weather. But the good news is it should be actually pretty good. Versus Tennessee at Indy, that's a dome game, and then versus Chicago. So as long as it isn't raining in San Francisco at any point during this next couple of weeks, I think Brock Purdy will be a solid play with a 20 to 25 point ceiling. Do I think he can give you a 12-point game? Absolutely. And that's why I've got to mitigate it a little bit by putting him down here at 11. Jacoby Brissett is at 12, and Justin Herbert is at 13 to round out this tier. Jacoby Brissett, I've said it over and over again. He's done nothing but give you 20-plus fantasy point games. 19 to 25 points is what you're going to get. And that's great. The only reason I don't trust him is because this Houston matchup, I wonder what could happen if that could screw up his confidence, if maybe they hit him a little too much, or his team just completely falls apart at this time of the year because they're already in the process of falling apart. That being said, Brissett has done really well, even in garbage time situations. I do think that at this point, I would take him over an injured Justin Herbert because Justin Herbert, I'm projecting that he plays through the injury and I'm projecting that he'll do fine, but I would rather have someone who's healthy and has been playing very consistent because if you take away this injury from Herbert, he has not been good the last 3 games, like good at all, like playable. It's been bad. At Kansas City, at Dallas versus Houston, the 2 matchups at first are good. But then that Houston game, that's scary. And again, we don't know what he's going to look like with this hand injury that he just suffered. So I would imagine he'll look better than Rodgers does because Rodgers is in his 40s. But they're both dealing with broken, non-throwing hands or wrists. And the offensive line is what got him here in the first place. So I can't rank him much higher than this. Dropping down to our last tier. Baker Mayfield has definitely fallen in my rankings, and it was not a mistake for me to leave him out of the quarterback rankings on Thursday for Week 14. That was not a mistake, because if you look at Baker's game log, it's actually been very Jared Goff-esque, who will go here at the end, and that's not a compliment, because Goff and him have been both giving you like 10 to 8 point weeks, sometimes 13 to 14, with the high end of 25, and that's barely been hit at all this year. Baker is clearly not healthy right now. His receivers are not healthy. Maybe they're getting healthier, and it could be one of those situations where, given the matchups, they could have a hot run at the end of the season. Versus Atlanta, at Carolina, at Miami, I'm putting him in here in the top 16 because I know the upside could, in theory, be there. But I will just say this. All you have to do is look at the game log this year. It's not been there for Baker to hit consistent upside games or consistent floor games. So he's a risk in my opinion. Caleb is also a risk too. Caleb is a guy that could give you 30 or he could give you 7. Like that's the problem with Caleb. And it's been a little bit Bo Nix-esque, I would say, where it's like you kind of don't know when you're going to get one or the other. And that's the huge risk that Caleb offers. Because versus Cleveland, that's in theory a bad matchup. Versus Green Bay, in theory, that's not a good one. And in theory, at San Francisco, could be a good one. But with Caleb, they are a run-dominant team. That's what they want to do. And Caleb has been a guy that's been more of a game manager lately. So I just don't know what to think. He's a risk, but a high upside one. Goff is a lesser end Baker because Goff's playmakers are all basically there. And the problem is that Bakers are coming back. So I would rather take Baker over Goff. But once again, look at the game logs. It doesn't tell a lie in there. Baker's game log has been very similar to Goff's. A couple high ceiling games of 25 points, but mostly a lot of mid and even some bad in there. So with Goff going to the Los Angeles Rams, I actually think that could be a good one because it's a revenge game versus Pittsburgh's good, and then at Minnesota could be good. It's not the matchups that are the problem. It's the fact that this guy has not been a great fantasy quarterback. That's the problem. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the updated top 12 defense rankings for the playoffs, click on this video right here.